Hello, hello. Come on in. You know what time it is. It is One Africa Worldview. It is Monday, y'all. Come on in. You know what we do. As always, we have a show for you today. So come on in. Come on in. Like, share, subscribe. Let them know we're here. It's Monday. You know what time it is. Come on in. Come on in. And also, along with the show that we have for you today, we have one of our favorite guest and now co-host of the show, Dr. Matsemela Odom here. Come on in, and how are you doing, Dr. Matsemela?
Who everybody? Who? I'm well. I'm well. I'm well. I am happy to be back as a guest. I'm normally as a guest, but also as a former host of the Black Power Talks podcast. It's really good to be here today. Um, yeah, I'm Dr. Matsemela or Director Matsemela Odom. I'm Cadre Development Director for the African People's Socialist Party, and it's good to have you all tuned in to the Black Power. The One Africa Worldview podcast. I don't mean to be jumping a gun a little bit, but just wanted to say that.
Yeah, you heard him. Come on in and welcome back here. Come on in, y'all. You know what it is. We like to see you. Come on in. Join us today in the comments. We have a show for you today. One Africa Worldview. You know what time it is 2 p.m. It is that time. So, yeah, if you're all ready, we can get right into it.
Let's do it.
I'm Dr. Mariah, and I am the Promotions Director for Black Power 96.3 FM, available worldwide through the Black Power 96 mobile app.
Uhuru, and I'm Dr. Matsemela Odom, the Cadre Development Director for the African People's Socialist Party, and you're tuned into the One Africa Worldview podcast, the show that brings you an African internationalist analysis to the day's top headlines and a to what end for our struggle against colonialism.
That struggle, yeah. And our show airs, y'all, every Thursday on Black Power 96 Radio. And that is at 2 p.m. Eastern. And it's also posted to the Burning Spear Substack. In today's episode, you might recognize the face of my co host here, Dr. Matsemela. And he has been one of our show a few times now over the seasons. And he always brings us the history and the breakdown that we need. And he's here to guest host alongside me today through today's show. And as we said, we have one for you today, as always. And we're just very excited to have you here, your comrade Matsemela. And we have a packed show for you, as always. So, yeah.
As always, it's good to be on the One Africa Worldview podcast, Dr. Mariah, and as a co-host this time. I'm excited for today's program because we have our Whirlwind Weekly Update looking at the World Cup, the case of young brother Karmelo Anthony, and the latest on Iran's victory over the U.S. Then we have our primary objective, which takes a look at the anti-colonial movement in Latin America with comrades Paolo and Hugo of Los Ronderos de las Redes, who will be giving us updates on the elections in Peru. You might recall that Comrade Hugo was on with with us in season 4 to give us an overview on politics in Peru and the significance of the elections that unfolded there. And as promised, we will be back on live from Peru to discuss what's happened since.
Y'all heard him, y'all, live from Peru. We have it for you right here on today's show. So you stay locked in. And just before we really get right into this exciting program that we do have for you, we want to remind our viewers and our listeners that you can support the media and the work of the Burning Spear TV YouTube channel by becoming paid supporters, y'all, and enjoy the benefits like the discounts on our online store and just shout outs that we give on our channel. And you can use the super chat feature to get your comments or questions acknowledged while we're actually live today during the show. And it's simple and easy to do. Hit that subscribe button, y'all, and support the platform that brings you the anti-colonial news and analysis that you need. And now that we said all that, and we just want to go ahead and get right into it and the Whirlwind Weekly updates for this week. So yeah, and you can't scroll down your timeline without seeing all of this talk of Karmelo Anthony and just both sides with all of the information coming here. And this is, and if you haven't, it's this 19-year-old Karmelo Anthony, and he was recently convicted by an all-white jury for the murder of colonizer Austin Metcalf. And Karmelo was 17 at the time of the incident that occurred, and just he was waiting out in the rain at a high school track and field event. And this Austin guy and his twin brother Hunter began to not only harass the young brother here, but began to forcibly remove Karmelo from the tent where he sought shelter for the rain, y'all, under a tent. And Karmelo then used a multi-use pocket tool, which contained a knife, to fight off his colonial aggressors here. And Austin was stabbed and died from the injuries occurring. And Karmelo was arrested and forced to stand trial for an act of self-defense. Colonizers were incensed by the fact that Karmelo had the audacity to fight back, and just resulting in the death of one of their own this time. And so much that Karmelo's location had to remain undisclosed the entire time. And this is the type of reaction that the colonial ruling class holds up, y'all. It makes it so that the colonizers support the violence carried out against African people, and also serves as an ammunition for regular, everyday white people to act as voluntary arms of this colonial era. And this is the colonial state is building this mantra to where, as they've done historically, and we know that such threats resemble white mobs capturing Africans from these jail cells to publicly lynch them, which were met with praise and celebration, y'all. Karmelo was tried in front of a non-black jury. We want to say that all white jury, not a jury of your peers. The jury elected to charge Karmelo with murder rather than manslaughter. And the deliberation lasted, it wasn't even 3 hours that they came up with this. At 19, Karmelo is sentenced now to 35 years in prison, y'all. So when we speak of these cases and we're talking about that, we're not just speaking about them as if they're just these anomalies. We're to understand that this is a regular feature of the life under colonialism, y'all. And we know that there are numerous contradictions and violations of their own colonial law. And we know that there's hypocrisy when it comes to this, and when the police and others get to kill Africans with impunity. So we can and should draw those things out as part of exposing the illegitimacy of the colonizer and their system of a colonial mode of production. And we can use this case to draw out the reality that African people being colonized subjects. And we can break the myth of citizenship and rights for African people. It don't exist, y'all. And expose what our real relationship is under this system. The slave is never supposed to break free from the slave master. We know that. And the colonized are never supposed to fight back against the violent, oppressive colonizer. We are supposed to accept the violence, accept the humiliation, and dehumanization without consequence to anything for the colonizer. But Karmelo represents a shift, y'all. It's a shift in this whole consciousness that's going on when it comes to African people. Similar to the Alabama boat brawl a couple of years ago that we all saw, and we're all proud of every time we see those folded chairs. And where Africans united to defend themselves against these just belligerent people there and these belligerent colonizers. So the expectation of the docile Negro, y'all, that is shattered. It's gone. Forget about it. It's not happening. So the colonizer is not exceptional that they can be defeated. It's not. And this is what the case of Karmelo Anthony signifies. The reality is Karmelo Anthony wouldn't have likely been jumped, badly injured, or even worse had he not been had defended himself. He wouldn't even be here. So Carmelo was not only informed by history, but the present reality for Africans under this whole system that we talk about all the time. He was not going to become another dead African, and we stand with Carmelo on that position, y'all. So African people must have an organized response to the colonial violence and terrorism that's going on, and guided by the revolutionary anti-colonial theory. And we must build state power as to hold our own courts, y'all, and put the real criminal on trial in these courts. And we must take our own power back so that brothers and sisters like Carmelo, that we see happening all the time, don't have to take the matter of self-defense into their own hands. This is what the African People's Socialist Party exists, and this is what the African People's Socialist Party does, y'all. And our party is building our capacity to take power and to be self-governing and to destroy the system of colonial domination and exploitation overall. So yeah, whenever
Yeah, right on. I appreciate that, because colonial violence does not simply exist. Colonial violence does not simply rear its head inside the settler colony of the United States. The recent violence that has been happening in the ghettos of the settler colony of South Africa has been occurring as a result of the campaign of the petty bourgeois charlatans like Jacinta Ngobesi and Zuma, and her March and March campaign, which has sought to further disperse our African nation as an act to help South Africa stay as is, colonial. Africans all over the world are watching in shame and disgust as this unfolds. And the majority of Black workers in South Africa are against this campaign of reinforcing for dumb passes against Black people in our own land. And this is important. Let me say that again. The reason why we have to say that again is because the actions of the petty bourgeoisie in South Africa is being used and held against African workers in South Africa who are also against this policy. So Africans all over the world are watching in shame and disgust as this unfolds. And a majority of Black workers in South Africa are against this campaign of reinforcing for dumb passes against Black people in our own land. There have been a number of lives lost in the previous month to the recent time, based on the March on March campaign, which has designated itself as a force to keep South Africa for South Africans, not realizing that simply means colonizers must have access to our soil of Africa and its resources, because only white people are legally South Africans by their own historical objective definition. We, the African People's Socialist Party, strong, and this is from you can find a longer excerpt of this actually in the recent Burning Spear newspaper. We, the African People's Socialist Party, strongly oppose any and all of these so-called countries on the continent of Africa. We denounce all of them, and we see them as our structural objective antagonists. This is why we are opposed to South Africa and its attempts to maintain itself. We say that South Africa and all the other neo-colonial and settler colonial projects exist at our expense as African people all over the world, not just in South Africa, which is why we even salute the way in which African people from all over the world have stood up against South Africa in the World Cup, as many you all have seen.
Yeah, and just as you said. And speaking of that World Cup, we have some information and some news for you there also. And when it comes to that, the U.S. is just being one of the hosts of the World Cup, and it couldn't help but find its whole imperialist arrogance and just making African players from Senegal stand with their arms actually outstretched, y'all, as they went through their heightened security checks just to get into the venues there. And they actually banned African referee from Somalia from even participating in the events and refused to host Iranian players. And these Iranian players are now having to stay in Mexico. And this is just, crazy, y'all. So FIFA has not allowed interview questions in Spanish to happen. And World Cup ticket sales and hotel bookings were so low this year, as many people are boycotting this year's World Cup in solidarity with Palestine. And through the World Cup is a colonial competition sponsored by parasitic corporations, these big banks that we're seeing involved, just being heavily promoted, and just the whole colonizer media. And when it comes to that, many Africans cheer for African teams and African players on these colonizer teams. And we have to say that we do have favorite players. But when it comes to those teams, they would not be able to achieve any of their victories without have not been for these African players. So a notable victory is Mexico's 2-0 win against South Africa, and the colonial name for Occupied Azania, where the people in Mexico, through the state's interests, run contrary to those of the indigenous people, are indigenous, and this continent is indigenous land. Brazil and Morocco's drew 1-1 when it came to that score there. And though Haiti lost 0-1 to Scotland, Haiti's team put a very good offense, we saw there. And Scotland should have gotten a red card after a high kick that hit an African player that happened. So Scotland got at least 3 yellow cards for that. And every time Haiti's team stole the ball or set up a really solid play, we saw a sea of Scotland fans booed. But the few Africans who were able to afford the tickets and get around the U.S. travel ban held Haiti's flag proudly there at the event. So the muted jersey that FIFA demanded be changed so as to not reference the Haitian Revolution was not enough to dampen the spirit of these African players from Haiti and fans of Haiti's team. So the Cape Verde team, which is African, denied Spain, the reigning European champions, a whole point, y'all, by drawing 0-0. So Egypt drew with Belgium 1-1, and an African scored Belgium's goal. And the Uruguay team was subjected to drug-sniffing dogs when they came into the United States. Despite this, they drew a 1-1 with Saudi Arabia. And the Iran team, despite having had to travel from Mexico to the U.S. and harassed by the pro-U.S. Iranians, drew with New Zealand a 2-2. And Iran dedicated the match to the modern schoolgirls. And France's 4-1 against Senegal doesn't mean much when France is relying on Kylian Mbappe. DRC drew 1-1 against Portugal and humiliating Portugal in that match. And Argentina's favorite player, y'all, should have had a red card for deliberately stepping on an Algerian player's calf, but nothing happened there. And fans have been saying that FIFA is protecting the Argentina team, and apparently it isn't the first time that they coddled the Argentina team in the past. So that we saw it happening in an earlier game where the referee actually awarded the point to the Argentine player that was offside. So someone who knows the game observed that if Argentina's favorite had gotten a red card, it wouldn't have fit the narrative about the competition that FIFA has built, y'all. So this particular player is shielded, and Ghana won 1-0 against Panama. And Panama was amongst all African, and so the only way to tell which team was from the jerseys, showing the absurdity when it comes to the players there, y'all. It's just of the borders that separate Africans. And on Saturday, June 19th, Morocco clinched a win against Scotland at 1-0 after scoring in the very first minute, y'all.
Uhuru, yeah, and as an African who has family in Panama, I supported anybody to win that game as long as they fought real hard, because I understood that it represent a fracture in the superstructure of the colonial mode of production. And we know that France, led by Kylian Mbappe, whose father is from, if I'm correct, Cameroon, and his mother is from Algeria, both their team stands at the forefront to win. But even if they win, we know that the only way that they'll be able to win is by way of the labor of African people, both by the labor of an all African team, Africans from the Caribbean and Africans who come directly from the continent. So this colonial contradiction is important, even though we know that it's a contest without guns. It nevertheless represents a colonial a contradiction in the colonial mode of production. Nevertheless, the memorandum now onto the United States surrender to Iran. The memoranda of understanding between Iran and the United States confirms a resounding defeat for the United States. There are 14 points to the memoranda of understanding signed by Iran and the United States on June 17th. Permanent ceasefire, including respect of Lebanon's sovereignty, mutual non-interference. Negotiations on a permanent deal must conclude with 60 days unless both parties agree to an extension, end of the U.S. naval blockade within 30 days, and other forces will be withdrawn later. Iran's guarantee of safe maritime passage in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. $300 billion reconstruction and economic development plan for Iran. End of U.S. sanctions, end of IAEA sanctions, and an end of the unilateral sanctions on Iran. Nuclear commitments, arrangements for Iran's nuclear enrichment and nuclear program. Iran will continue nuclear activities while the U.S. will refrain from new sanctions or military deployments. There will also be a release of Iran's foreign assets and implementation oversight. These are the conditions to finalizing an agreement and the endorsement of a final agreement when one is reached. The United States already broke the memorandum of understanding less than 24 hours after it was signed because of Israel's attack on Lebanon. And Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz again and suspended further talks. Hardliners, including State Departments, including Senate Democrats and Israel, were not happy because the memorandum of understanding signaled a surrender. Even Vance, J.D. Vance, backed the MOU. Obama expressed frustration that the U.S. has not made any gains despite all military expenses. U.S. oil reserves have been at the lowest since 1983, another time in which we saw these struggles taking place. The United States waging attack against Iran through its proxy at that time, Iraq. Since the initial writing of this report, after U.S. backed Israel refused to end the bombing of Lebanon, Iran moved to close the Strait of Hormuz, and the first round of Iran-U.S. talks concluded today in Switzerland. Trump has renewed threats on Iran, but U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance issued a "don't bite the hand that feeds you" warning to Israel. We will keep you updated as we learn more. That concludes our Whirlwind Weekly Updates. Now it's time to move to the primary objective segment of our show. We have guests from Los Ronderos de las Redes, Comrade Paolo in the U.S. and Comrade Hugo in Peru, joining us today, and we're going to be talking about some important developments on the Latin American front of the worldwide anti-colonial movement. Paolo Cruzalegue is a journalist and co-leader of the Peruvian collective Los Ronderos de las Redes. Hugo Mauricio Bayon Becerra is a co-founder of Los Ronderos, and both are here to put forward a political analysis of the indigenous struggles for self-determination and to connect Peruvians in the diaspora to the political crisis in their homeland. Uhuru, and welcome, comrades Paolo and Hugo. Thank you for joining us today.
Uhuru, Matsemela, Mariah. I got both of the doctors here today. Yeah. So we're gonna do a prognosis on colonials, aren't we?
Right on.
It's really good to see you all. Yes. So let's get to the slide. First off, let's talk about the Peru. There's a lot has been going on, and a lot of misreporting regarding elections, regarding the political situation for the past almost 4 years. So we have Comrade Hugo and I here images of us in Lima, Peru, in front of the maximum security prison where Pedro Castillo, our former president, was kidnapped and detained there, and he's currently sentenced for 11 more years in that prison. And so we have a candidate, Roberto Sanchez, from the Juntos per Peru left-wing coalition that is fighting for his release, and is standing with the indigenous peoples of the Andes and the Amazon, and for other marginalized groups such as the Africans that were part of the colonial period that make up 2% of the population, but they are one of the groups that have been oppressed as well, along with the rest of the population, enslaved indigenous populations. And so this is what the representation of what the anti-colonial left is in Peru, in contrast to the other candidates, Keiko Fujimori, of Japanese descent. Her father, of course, is Alberto Fujimori, for many of those who have heard about Peru's politics from the legacy of the 1990s. And so some of the images as well are above are two family members of the martyrs that I got to visit and meet and do interviews with, as well as interviewing the president inside the Barbadillo prison separately. These are just only two out of 77 and more, counting countless victims during the time after the ouster of Pedro Castillo in 2022, when I was present during that coup d'etat in December 2022. And so we've had iterations of changing of governments, but still remaining the same. It's Fujimorismo, the system of the neocolonial system of extracting our natural resources for the profits of the transnational corporations, and genocide of the indigenous populations of Quechuas, Aymaras, and so forth. And so we can get to the next slide to talk about the election results of the second round.
Yeah, and before that, I just thank you so much for being on the show here today, and it's just so great to really just have you bring it back, just coming back to just talk about this whole discussion, and we're just really looking forward to having you catch our comrades up with just getting us caught up with speed as it relates to the whole. Just there's a couple of high stake elections here that we're talking about, and when it comes to on the Latin front. And so first, if you just can kind of give us a refresher really about Peru's elections altogether, and what are the outcomes and their implications when it comes to the elections, and why should people everywhere keep their eyes out for what's happening here?
Right. And also, in adding to that, we know that another election that we should keep our eyes on is the one that occurred in Colombia. As you give us this election analysis that we're already, into, importantly, and I really appreciate the visuals going along with this. Can you also tell us about how these two elections are connected? We can pass it back to you.
Yes. So I just first want to give it and floor to my compañero Hugo. to speak on a bit of both, and then I chime in too.
Of course. Yeah, my name's Hugo. Thank you guys for having me back. Really excited to speak with you. I had a great time last time. We spoke. Sadly, it's not on a great topic. I guess to try to speak a little bit about the question that was just placed about the importance, how this you know impacts people in the U.S. as well. Historically, everything that's been tried in the third world and or the backyard of the U.S., it's ended up impacting the citizens. The repression, all the tactics have ended up coming back home. We see this in Puerto Rico with the forced sterilizations. We also see this with the forced sterilizations that the U.S. worked alongside the dictatorship of now the deceased ex-dictator Alberto Fujimori, connected to now that we're talking about his daughter, the 300,000 women in the Andes that were sterilized. This wasn't that long ago. They're still out there protesting. We had a huge Keiko no Va march about a week out before the election, and these women traveled all the way from the south. That's so far. First off, we have awful transportation. We have our roads or your infrastructure is just horrible. The fact that they went all the way from the south, some of them from Puno, Arequipa, these areas that they're probably 16, 18 hours to travel, just to make sure that their voices were heard, just to make sure that memory of the past was present. That's just very admirable. I hope to have a little bit of the fight that they have. That's just one example of how all these tools impact us. Now, currently, we're seeing a repression. We're also seeing like a new strategy that the U.S. is testing out on interference in Latin America. It's not as implicit. And right now we're kind of seeing the testing water in Colombia and Peru. But ultimately the main targets are going to end up being Brazil and Mexico. That's where they want to perfect it. So right now what ends up happening in these regions is it's not going to be an act and then we're finished. It's going to be something that's going to be continuing to happen throughout the next couple of years. So it's definitely important to care, show solidarity, and I'm so thankful that you guys are giving us the space and doing exactly so.
Uhuru. Yeah. So let's get to the election results here. It's unofficial right now, since it's still being counted, though it is 99% of the vote count already confirmed. But what we have is a discrepancy where in Lima and the diaspora, they vote ultra right, they vote reactionary, with the colonial mindset of what capitalism brings to the global South. They very much idolize the wealth, the portrayal of what Hollywood brings to the world, of how the U.S. is portrayed internally. But here, of course, us living in the diaspora, in the belly of the beast, we understand the realities of the daily struggles within the United States. One currently, of course, ICE, and that's harming our Peruvian migrants community too. And so we have this discrepancy where not only were there irregularities and that are leading up to fraud by Fujimori, but the diaspora votes we're seeing here, which is pictured in the far right, the extranjero vote, the foreign vote. That's including all parts of the world that have a consulate for Peruvian expatriates that have their proper documents to vote in the diaspora. And so that's where Fujimori has a lead. But if you take out that amount, you have only Peru with the domestic vote nationwide, a majority for Roberto Sanchez, where the people of Peru have definitively voted for Roberto Sanchez in their homeland, because they understand the daily struggle of working 6 days a week with a little in earnings. Many of them in the informal economy as street vendors. And it's, of course, a very difficult life, without power, without lights or portable drinking water. In the provinces, there are many communities that have contaminated water, so they can't shower, or they get sick. There's heavy metals contaminating nearby the communities that have their land being stolen just for the extraction of the natural resources. For example, Peru is ranks second in the world for their silver production, and so it's not only silver but gold, historically, lithium, and uranium. There's a huge uranium deposit in Peru that is underdeveloped, and so the corporations in the U.S., in Europe, in Canada, they're looking to extract these areas, and of course they don't care about the consequences. So they're committing ecocide and genocide of the indigenous populations. The government, of course, doesn't care about this. They're abandoning the countryside and neglecting it through the process of centralismo, centralism, where all the wealth, business opportunities, the educational opportunities for the youth are all concentrated in the capital of Lima, a city that was created before the foundation of Peru itself, a city that was founded by the conquistador Francisco Pizarro, who was, of course, the one who colonized Peru and as well as kidnapped our last Inca leader, Atahualpa, who was held for ransom. And when the indigenous people provided the gold and silver for the ransom, they collected it, but nonetheless executed him. So we understood back then, us colonized people, that we can never trust the colonizers. But we still have to this day that the colonized population still function in power in the elite. The oligarchy is in control, what we call a captured government, a hijacked institution of all branches, in the courts, in the electoral system as well. And so that's how we're seeing a potential fraud in this election.
Oh wow, that's so interesting there, and thank you for giving a little bit of a refresher there, and just sharing how important this is, to pay attention to what's going on here, and just as Dr. Matsemela mentioned, when it comes to the election that we also should have our eyes on are the ones over in Colombia also. So when it comes to these two, how are these two elections? Can we just touch back and just talk a little bit more of how are they actually connected?
Yeah. Well, if we go to the next slide, we'll see how comparable they are, how close they are to a tie. This is a 49% as of this morning, and where they're neck to neck. But Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of the United States, not Colombia, is calling the election already early, even though the results are unfinished. They're unofficial yet. And so there's already a heavy hand in play by the U.S. government, Israel, and other reactionary international forces. Not only those two powers, but also the Latin American ultra-right figures. Even Keiko Fujimori, she had on the week of the Peruvian presidential elections, which was held on June 7th, she had the Maria Corina Machado from the Venezuelan opposition, the Venepatrias, contacted her, do a virtual meeting to lend her support, as well as the candidate on the right here, Abelardo de la Espriella, a millionaire lawyer. He also contacted to give good wishes to Keiko Fujimori. And so there's already an allegiance in play here. De la Espriella, his background is actually a wealthy lawyer who played in the role of defending the paramilitary soldiers that were anti-communist death squads that were active throughout the internal armed conflict in Colombia that is still ongoing. We have FARC rebels and other insurgents in Colombia that are active, and so that's what is also causing the chaos in Colombia, allowing the far right to gain an advantage, despite that FARC or ELN dissident forces that did not agree on the peace deal that the government of Gustavo Petro created, that Cuba mediated. They are these dissident groups are committing violence in their territories, in their turf, and they're also part of the drug trade as well. Unfortunately, has to be said, and so that's giving an advantage for the far right to do this, and to even align the so-called communist threat as narco terrorism. Despite that, historically, figures like Ronald Reagan, the whole international reaction have been supportive of the drug trade through the Iran Contra scandal. They have transported cocaine through the CIA's help to destabilize the Black liberation struggle here in the United States in the 1980s and 90s.
Oh wow, wow! Thank you for just giving that clear connection of how this is related. And we just wanted to mention how Chairman Amali Yeshitela in a webinar that we saw earlier this year, he spoke about how the attacks on Cuba, Venezuela, all these, they're not isolated events, and these are not just these one-off occurrences that's happening. They're all connected to to the same struggle that's happening in Africa, the struggle that we're seeing going on in the United States, in Palestine, and Iran. We're seeing it happen just all over the world. This whole forcibly locked into this whole one economic system and defined by the whole colonial mode of production. And when it comes in just the relation to this, we see the important revolutionary activity that's unfolding, and just in places like Bolivia, we're seeing it happening in Ecuador and just all over elsewhere there. So can you tell us, and perhaps Comrade Hugo, you can take this one, or whoever, can you tell us about what's happening there and just how this all really connects to the struggles in Peru?
Of course, of course. Well, I guess just to go back a little bit, I also wanted to make one more connection. Bringing it back to Fujimorismo and just the legacy that they've built not only nationally but also internationally. One of the main things that actually, I guess, ended up bringing down the dictatorship back in the day was actually how greedy they were. They weren't just happy with smuggling, or money, taking it to Japan on a plane. They weren't happy, sending their kids to the most expensive universities in the world. They also were, selling weapons. They were using weapons that the U.S. sent, and they were selling it to the FARC. So at the end of the day, these are people. They're sellouts. They don't care. They don't have a loyalty to anyone. In fact, sadly, historically, there's a lot of former social movement leaders that things get complicated. The pressure gets too high, and then they sell their soul, and now they're up there with the Fujimoristas, spewing all this hate, calling everyone terrorists. When at the end of the day, you can go on Google, and I can find a picture of you with your fist up right there, with the hammer and sickle in the background. It's the at the end of the day, yeah, money talks, sadly, and we definitely see how they change with that. I guess some that Bolivia is showing, the resistance that they're showing, that is gonna spread. Bolivia, they have with Puno in the southern part of Peru. It's the same culture. They're Aymara, they're Quechua people, and they're gonna fight the same way. Now, Paolo, I know he's a lot more in touch with what's the struggle in Bolivia. Some that I can say is that I know that recently the U.S. is supporting the president and the repression that's going on down there, And sadly, it seems like the union leader to pressure and asking the down a little bit. But I definitely think that this an area where Paolo can expand a lot more.
Yeah. So particularly on Bolivia, primarily their struggle is for the resignation of Rodrigo Paz. I was there in twice in 2025 for a delegation in February of 2025, and went back to Peru as well, meeting with Hugo to demonstrate in front of the prison where Castillo is held. But when I was there for a second time in Bolivia, there was during the time of the presidential election, the 200th anniversary of their founding as a country. I was seeing the political divisions of the anti-colonial left of Evo Morales supporters and Luis Arce's government, and so that deteriorated what the potential of a new formation could look like, and allowed the rise of Rodrigo Paz or someone worse, who was clearly going to be another stooge for U.S. In Israel. But nonetheless, Rodrigo Paz, a center-right president, was born in Spain. He was a son of the former president of Bolivia. And there's pictures of him even in D.C. At the White House with George H.W. Bush when Paz was younger. And so he comes back into power to reestablish U.S. and Israeli relations, and now also, of course, politically distancing Bolivia's anti-colonial, anti-imperialist line that was strongly supported by the people of Bolivia for it being a socialist, and the decolonization process. There's now reforms for the constitution that Morales and his people, the MAS party back then, that were in power for about 20 years, that they created to transform Bolivia into a plurinational state, to represent the Bolivian flag with the huipala. And so we have now just countless of people in the streets, the streets that I've walked in La Paz, and seeing how forceful it is to now to this point. It's already been a month. It's still ongoing, but now Paz is putting getting more support from the U.S. Now there is a state of emergency in play, where they're also arresting leaders of the unions and the social movements, labeling them as domestic terrorists. And we, of course, heard that before in the United States context, when it comes to the fight against ICE, the fight against the whole bloody system, not just Trump. And so we are seeing the resilience of the people of Bolivia, and that's a fight that's also going to be potentially carried out in Peru. It's already carrying out in Chile with the student movements in the streets, in Argentina as well, and as well as in Ecuador, where these struggles are in play under far-right governments that are aligned with the U.S. Narco governments such as Daniel Noboa of Ecuador, who he himself was, of course, born in, and made sure that his children of Ecuadorian descent born in Miami. So, yeah.
Well, right on. Yeah, I really appreciate that because as we look in right now, we are about a month away from the 205-year anniversary, theoretically, of Peruvian independence. We are just a couple years away from the 500-year anniversary of Pizarro's attack against the Inca Empire. That was part of a larger, of course, a series of colonial attacks against indigenous people of the Americas that go back to 1492, but also part of the 600-year onslaught of colonial capitalism against indigenous people from around the world, beginning in Africa, then in the Americas and Asia in sort. That's why, it's not happenstance that we see the very same contradictions taking place in these struggles in Latin America right now, especially these sort of class contradictions, the contradictions of the indigenous people versus people who descend from Spain and even literally identify with Spain. And just a little side note, I remember I was teaching, this was 16 years ago now, and the World Cup was happening. And, these students I had that were, not from Spanish descent were rooting for Spain. And then I think Spain won that year, and they were like, oh, it's kind of like we won. I said, nah, y'all didn't win. I said, y'all didn't win. I was surprised. But it's not a coincidence. When you talk about the superstructure, the way through which Spanish colonial media maintains its influence, not just coming from the centers of Latin America, but coming all the way from Spain and the conservative sort of reactionary movements over there in Spain influencing people. It's created a situation in which people in Latin America are more culturally Spanish than even people in Spain. People in Latin America go to Catholic church more than people in Spain, and all these other contradictions that you that you identify. So as the African People's Socialist Party, we are organizing different fronts of the African Revolution wherever we are. That's our front. We also stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters of Latin America, indigenous people from Alaska to the tip of Chile, not just in well-wishing, but in sharing the same fate, as Comrade Che Guevara would say. As we move to end this powerful interview, we only got a couple minutes left. As we move to end this powerful interview, could you tell us how to support the work of Los Ronderos de las Redes?
Yeah. First, I want to share the video we've got. It's just a minute detailing how the U.S. Is heavily involved in Peru, but is an example of everywhere else in the region of South America, Latin America as a whole, and that we can get to that portion. So it would be the next slide.
Bueno, y precisamente la inseguridad es uno de los temas más importantes para el Perú. No solamente el crimen organizado, pero también el crimen transnacional. ¿Cómo está ayudando Estados Unidos en esta lucha de los peruanos?
En la Embajada de los Estados Unidos en el Perú están todos los agencias importantes de los Estados Unidos, el FBI, el DHS, CFPB, todos están ahí. Estamos donando equipamiento, hemos donado 9 Black Hawk helicópteros, ya hemos entregado 6. Así que esos son parte de los acuerdos que estamos haciendo con el Perú. También el Perú acaba de firmar un acuerdo para comprar 12 F-16, quieren comprar 24, muy importante porque cambia de estrategia que tenían con Rusia, tenían los aviones MiG rusos, pero ahora van a tener el F-16 bloque 70 y el Perú va a tener el equipamiento mejor de toda la región, pero como vuelvo y repito, la seguridad, queremos ser el socio y somos el socio de seguridad del Perú, pero también queremos ser el socio económico del Perú.
And we can move to the next slide.
Well, we're running short, but I just want to say
yes,
that looks like the attack against the Uhuru movement. But yeah,
yes,
let's go on.
Exactly.
We want to hear from you.
Yes. So exactly what you're saying is that I was going to say exactly how they're implementing their same patterns of raids. They have the literal FBI, a permanent presence in Ecuador. They have what the U.S. ambassador to Peru is saying. Who, first of all, he's born in Puerto Rico, but also he's Cuban descent, and so he was from the Miami Mafia, as we call it, and where the Gusanos function, and where the CIA function out of, with the Cuban exiles, and so they have that presence everywhere, including in Peru with within the U.S. Embassy in Peru. They got the FBI agents and DHS present there. And why would this expand to this area here? So we can see how they're organizing. As we're having a ceasefire once again. We don't know how long that's going to last, but with Iran. But they are now focusing their attention once again back into Latin America. It's back and forth. The same patterns of destabilization and coups and wars, and forever wars. And so the next slide here.
Yeah, we are running low on time here,
okay.
So we want to make sure that we're able to, just to tell our listeners here, how can, as Dr. Matsemela asked, how can our listeners and viewers here support the work that Los Ronderos de las Redes is doing here? Can you tell us that?
Yeah. So we stressfully want to put out that we are in solidarity with the struggle for the African liberation with the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement. We are a part of that struggle. And if you go to the next slides here, cycling through, this is where the chairman stands with, of course, Latin America, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Of course, he's been to Nicaragua and played an important role there. And next slide. And so that's where we have our fight back coalition within the Latin American front here, where as well as people can support the case for the Uhuru 3, where there's an oral argument on July 22nd in Atlanta, Georgia. If they go to handsoffuhuru.org/take action. And then next slide, that's the final one. We encourage people to look up Los Ronderos de las Redes on our social medias, on Instagram, on X, and we're also on Upscroll because we're posting a lot about the struggle that is getting underreported. And there's, of course, here in the global north, there's the gatekeeper class of white leftists that are silencing our voices and not taking our perspectives into account of actual colonized peoples. And so that's where we are encouraging people to reach us out on our email to continue a media tour, talking about the Peruvian elections, talking about the Colombias as well, all of Latin America's struggle, and connecting that with what's going on with Asia, with Africa, because these struggles are all colonized struggles, and we're fighting the same struggle here.
I do want to mention that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, dear. And just Uhuru comrades, and want to just give a salute, and just Comrade Hugo, just a few short words, because we're coming up to the end of the show here, so we want to make sure we're able to hear from you.
I'll try to right to the point. I do want to highlight that at this higher stage of the dictatorship, before Keiko has even, gotten power, we're already seeing signs of the repression that's to come. We're already seeing a new law that was implemented that's going to make it, practically give impunity to any police officer if they kill anyone. We've already seen the first slain person, a 17-year-old that was killed. Then later, his family members were extorted for money, and after paying the money, they just gave him a body. And there's not going to be any accountabilities. We're seeing, right now they're putting, pretty much targeting social movement leaders that are organizing for the marches that are going on. And even at the march that was going on last week, we see police officers that are asking for your license. They want to identify you beforehand. The democracy is already in crumbles, and right now we're going to see a lot of that escalate. So we're really happy that you're giving us a platform. Please share, follow the site. We're going to be a lot more active moving forward. And unfortunately, it might not be the best updates, but it just highlights that it needs to be shared to make sure that we can stay protected, safe. That international eyes are on us.
On you. Thank you so much. Uhuru comrades, we want to give a huge salute to both of you. Just the tremendous amount of work that you're doing when it comes to the research and the knowledge, and that you bring to this whole discussion here. And it's just the work that you do to bring in this knowledge to us, and the whole anti-colonial revolutionary analysis, and giving us an understanding to the struggles unfolding on the Latin America front. We can continue on with this discussion, and we'll definitely have you back on so we can do so. So thank you so much. And we look forward to that, having you on with us again. Thank you so much, comrades.
Appreciate you too.
Uhuru.
Yeah, you're here. Now, y'all, that's a wrap. That's a wrap on the primary objective for this week. And we're coming to the end of our show as we do. And before everyone, we should know by now, we always like to close the show with how you can get involved. We like to tell the folks how they can connect and how they can get involved with what's going on the ground. And Dr. Matsemela, you do have that information with us for us. Can you share that with us for this week?
Oh, yes, thank you. On June 24th, from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join the African People's Solidarity Committee online for its June event, where they'll discuss the Reparations Investment Company, the latest initiative of the Black Power Blueprint in St. Louis, Missouri, on the front lines of the anti-colonial struggle. Learn how white people can take a stand through reparations and contributing to building political and economic power in the hands of the African Black community. You can register to reserve your spot for this event at apscuhuru.org/register. apscuhuru.org/register. And don't forget, we're calling on all who are able to come down to Atlanta, Georgia, for the July 22nd, 2026 Uhuru 3 oral arguments following the free speech trial of the century. Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa will be returning to court for the precedent-setting appeal of the Uhuru 3 case. The U.S. Court of Appeals has officially scheduled the oral argument for the Uhuru 3 in Atlanta, Georgia on Wednesday, July 22nd, 2026. Court convenes at 9 a.m. and the Uhuru 3 case is first on the docket. The hearing will take place in courtroom 339 at the Albert P. Tuttle U.S. Court of Appeals building located at 56 Forsyth Street, Northwest Atlanta, Georgia. We call on all supporters of the African liberation and anti-colonial free speech and the right to organize stand with the Uhuru 3 as this historic struggle advances. For all events not listed here, you can visit theburningspirit.com/events, theburningspirit.com/events for our events calendar to see upcoming events happening in your area or online that you can get connected with.
You heard it there, y'all. Go ahead to theburningspirit.com/events for all of those activities. So yeah, y'all, that is all that we have for you this week. And that is the show for today. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. We see all of the comments coming in. We want to keep them coming in. Thank you for the shout out there. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for the support as you always do. One Africa Worldview, where we're bringing you the news for you. So yeah, don't forget to subscribe to the Burning Spear TV channel so you can stay locked in and know when we are live. And until next week, y'all, One Africa,
One Nation, Uhuru.